Your mic's off, Kevin.
Yeah. Oh, there is that.
That sounded like a good story, but I can't hear you.
Okay, very good. Good evening, Creswell, and welcome to the Creswell City Council virtual work session for August 24th. I will call this meeting to order. I would like to make one announcement right off the top that Councilor Alonso Castillo has been excused tonight for a family matter. First item on our event agenda is going to be the roll call, so I will go ahead and call the roll. Councilor Castillo obviously is excused, so Councilor Drago.
Councilor Drago here.
Councilor Inman.
Councilor Inman here.
Council President Knutson.
Councilor Knutson here.
Councilor Prochu.
Councilor Prochu here and unmuted.
Very good. I like that. Good job. Councilor McReynolds.
Councilor McReynolds here.
Okay, and Mayor Zettervall is present, obviously. So we have 6 of 7 available here tonight. So first item on the agenda is the mayor's report. And I wanted to remind council that we are getting close to the time in which we need to think about the committee vacancies that will be coming forward for next year. So city staff right now is working with the members of the committees and the commissions whose terms, pardon me, whose terms will expire at the end of 2020. Those who have want to continue on their committees need to submit a written notice to the city recorder by the end of September, and they will automatically roll them forward into the future sessions for 2021. Notifications, if not received by the end of September, and the city will then assume that those members would not want to continue their volunteer service to the city. Formal announcement of the committee and commission vacancies will take place at the October 12th, 2020 City Council work session, and applicant interviews will take place in November, one of the council meetings in November, whether it be the council meeting or the work session. Item B on the mayor's report: with the ongoing challenges that our businesses are facing due to the COVID-19 crisis, I would like to remind our Creswellians to please patronize local. Follow the rules, wear a mask or cloth face covering, and make sure that you remember their success and long-term survival is literally in our hands. Let's all do our part and pledge to patronize local. That concludes the mayor's report. So we go into item 2, which is committee reports and Public Safety Committee. Councilor Inman.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So the Public Safety Committee met on August 3rd, and the discussion of that meeting was brainstorming and coming up with ideas for the National Night Out that has been moved to October, and trying to come up with ideas during a pandemic for an event, which I think we came up with some good virtual kind of outside of the box ideas. And then the next Public Safety Committee meeting is set for September 21st at 5:30. And that's all. Hello?
Pardon me, I had my mic
Oh,
muted.
okay. I thought I was just talking to air.
That's fine. That takes us to item B, which is the Transportation and Public Works Committee. Councilor Prochu.
Good evening, Mayor. We received our new charge and we have scheduled a meeting for August 31st at 6 p.m. It will be a virtual meeting. I encourage all the public that are able to watch via Facebook or YouTube, whatever the options are there, to do so. We will be discussing how we fund the reconstruction of 2nd Street.
Very good. Thank you very much, sir. And that takes us to item C, which is Lane Act Report. Back to Councilor Inman.
Yes, and also, Maddie, are you on the line?
I am, Councilor Inman.
I didn't know if you wanted to discuss your part, because that's pretty exciting.
Oh, sure. Councilor, Mayor Zettervall and Council, I
presented last meeting to the Lane Area Commission on Transportation requesting support for the Safe Routes to School application that you all heard at your last meeting. And I'm proud to report that Lane Act was favorable to our application, and they've expressed their support in the form of a letter. So that's a good move in the right direction. Thanks for the opportunity to share, Misty.
Sure, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Maddie.
And then secondly, there was a presentation and thought very interesting was talking about the House Bill 2017 and just the gap on kind of the funding of it. So what can get brought into with that, and then what is needed, and it's a pretty huge gap. And that will be interesting moving forward. The other thing too is the OTC and ODOT strategic action plan priorities. There's 3 of them. One is equity. The second one is modern transportation system. And then the third is sufficient and reliable funding, which all is important. And I don't have the next date. I apologize for the September meeting.
Very good. Thank you very much, Councilor Inman, and also for Ms. Phillips as well. So that leads us to item 3 on our agenda tonight, which is presentation. And that item A is downtown plan. Ms. Phillips, would like to welcome you back.
If you give me 1 second, I'm going to go ahead and pull up the presentation that I have put together. I may have to just quickly shut off my video in order to do that for just a moment. So I apologize, you won't be able to see my smiling face for just a brief moment. Mayor, councilors, I spent the last, we've spent the last year and a half working on an update to the downtown plan. The downtown plan, you might remember, is a document that acts as a sub-area plan. So we do comprehensive planning at a much larger scale for the whole city, but then we also do sub-area plans for unique areas of the community that may have unique opportunities or unique vision or require certain design standards or other development code type requirements in order to function or to form a cohesive district. In this case, the city of Crestwell has had a downtown plan for several years. Its first iteration started as an effort to actually do the work that created Oregon Avenue. So the right-of-way that you know of now as Oregon Avenue had some bulb outs and some other wonderful amenities added to it in the early 2000s. And as part of that effort, we as a city developed a plan that was meant for that application in particular. Sorry, you guys, I'm just pulling this up and I'm trying to get it so I can share my screen. So fast forward to 2 years ago, we were in the middle of working on the transportation system plan. As you might recall or know now, several of the roads that were identified for priority reconstruction or modernization are roads that traverse the downtown district. And the question was, where are the design standards for these roads? And should they look the same or might they look different than roadways that run through other residential neighborhoods in our community? And the answer to that question that you all acknowledged and staff certainly agreed was that, in fact, there should be a separate district or a different look to that area of the community that that follows a different design pattern. Can you all see the downtown plan update? Excellent. So as a response to that, in opening up this question, I had the help of a few interns over the course of several months. And we really dissected this downtown plan that we have in existence. And we realized and worked with the Planning Commission some to bat some ideas around. And we realized that the purpose statement of that district and some of the goals that were presented in that original plan, in fact, are 100% still valid. In fact, they're fairly universal in that we'd like to create a vibrant area for commercial activity and welcome people to the streets of downtown, etc. So the focus of our downtown plan update looked at 5 very specific topics. And those 5 topics should be covered in the memo that you have in your packets. And they kind of traverse a variety of things. The first being, of course, street standards, as I mentioned in the origin story of our downtown plan update. The next was parking as a tangent to that same idea. The third was wayfinding, about how folks get around. We've heard anecdotally several stories about people coming to Crestwell to find a particular business or a place, and they simply couldn't find it. And if you and I and everyone who lives in Crestwell recognizes that downtown Crestwell is quite small, and so it should not be hard to navigate. But for whatever reason, there was a lot of challenge in how you get down 2nd Street to get to that Crestwell Bakery. And we can all laugh a little bit about that, but it was a funny but poignant revelation. And then finally, there were 2 other topics. One had to do with housing in downtown, a response to the housing needs analysis that you all considered and adopted earlier last year. And finally, the possibility of seeing new civic buildings constructed in downtown Crestwell, which at the time we were very much in conversation with the fire district about their intention to redevelop their property. So that just kind of sets the stage for how we came to approach the downtown plan. Those of you who participated, and I do really appreciate your time, particularly those who were on the downtown team that met last year, and I'll kind of go through some of that history, but you feel free, those of you who participated, to chime in where you see fit. And also, I will apologize, I did thrift a little bit of some of those presentations to create this presentation, so you might see some similar themes. If you visited the downtown plan open house that was live all throughout the beginning part of end of 2018 into 2019, you may have seen some of these graphics as well. So just to provide some context, when I scroll, are you able to see that as well? Okay, great. So right now you see a picture of the downtown district. The main thoroughfare running east to west is Oregon Avenue, and you see Front Street, 1st, 2nd, 3rd Street. Northern boundary of downtown, just so we know where we are, is A Street, and the southern boundary of downtown is D Street. So downtown is comprised of approximately 12 blocks. And as I mentioned before, we've had several different iterations of public engagement for the topic, just to kind of not only elicit feedback, but also to put out some general information about where the downtown district begins and ends. That's often a tough question to answer for some, or the quiz question sometimes isn't answered correctly. We brought together a downtown advisory team consisting of members of the City Council, Planning Commission, interested parties, downtown business owners, folks who had ties to the school district, to think about ways that people use downtown and kind of solicit a diversity of interests. We pivoted a little bit. We were expecting to have an in-person open house style downtown kind of more celebratory meeting to solicit interest from particularly from downtown business owners. Unfortunately, due to COVID, we weren't able to do that event. So instead, we pivoted to a survey. I had some great help from Juliette Schmidt, who is a recent graduated intern from the city of Crestwell, and she put together a survey that helped us gather some information about people's visitation to downtown and what they perceive to be challenges and opportunities in the downtown area. And then finally, we did do some downtown business owner interviews. Part of that survey provided an opportunity to engage with us further. We asked for contact information if folks were willing to spend some time chatting with us. And we did end up speaking with 3 downtown business owners throughout the final stage of the public engagement process. Getting into the topic areas, so before I move on, does anyone have any questions about the types of public engagement we did or the reasons why we started the downtown plan update? No problems, no questions? Okay, very good. So we just launching into the topic of streets, so of those 5 topics, classification of those streets matters a lot. It typically determines how a street is meant to perform or how it's used. And there are 3 classifications of streets within the downtown district. 4 actually. One is an arterial. Oregon Avenue is an arterial road, so it carries the highest traffic and sometimes could have the highest speeds. As you move down through the classifications, they each have different intentions. So a collector road typically collects traffic from other smaller streets. A major collector is meant to have higher volume or higher throughput, is a term that's often used in traffic. That kind of road typically requires to have each user group segregated. So, for example, pedestrians on the sidewalk, bicyclists in the bike lanes, and traffic in cars in the travel lanes. When you get down into a minor collector road, there's a lot more flexibility. So there are opportunities to share bikes. Bikes can share lanes with cars, so often you'll see those Sharrow marks. And then even at a local street level, you'll notice that on your local streets where typically folks live, there are not typically markings on the roads because the intention is that everyone will share the space. And that has its pros and cons, but it is typically related to the speed limits and the size of the road. So whenever we do road design, that becomes, classification matters quite a bit. I just thought it was interesting and kind of fun to see our history of road construction in Crestwell. I don't know if you've all seen this photo, but this is the construction of Oregon Avenue. I believe this is from around incorporation. You can see in the background the railroad trestle or the railroad crossing signs. So we're looking, I believe we're looking east on Oregon Avenue. And I think one of the anecdotes I've heard is that instead of when folks were asked to pay taxes, you could opt to pay taxes or you could participate in a road crew for a period of time. So here we have some Crestwellians participating in the construction of the original Oregon Avenue. This, of course, is the heart of downtown. I would estimate this to be either First Street or possibly, between First and Second is about where I guess this location is in the photo. But you'll notice that we did do quite a bit of enhancement to the road, and the road kind of took on the life or the scale and size that we know now between the 70s and the 90s. You'll see photos. These are from our old downtown plan. And you'll notice that when you look at these photos, that Oregon Avenue looks remarkably different. The roadway that you see here looks a lot like perhaps some older style roads that you'd find in central or eastern Oregon, with the angled parking, really wide street with very narrow sidewalks, lots of impediments in the street, particularly in the sidewalks with those big telephone poles kind of taking up most of the sidewalk. You wonder if folks were really meant to walk there or if it was meant to be just an afterthought to the larger cars that were made in the 70s and 80s. Anyway, we've come a long way on Oregon Avenue, that's to say. So when we look at roadways, we sometimes look at, so roadway design takes the form of we can look at it two different ways, either a section view like this or a bird's eye view, which is often called plan view. So this is a section view that if we were to slice the road vertically and look at how the space is allocated, particularly on a collector road, because that's where it pertains the most, we can see that we have some wider travel lanes, not quite as wide as Oregon Avenue, but you can see that this is a 60-foot right-of-way, of which all of our roads in downtown are. Every road in downtown, every right-of-way is 60 feet wide. You'd never know it, but that's what we own. So it leaves room for consideration. So this is an example of a travel lane and bike lane and parking and sidewalk design that we started with, that we use as the basis for thinking about all of the different classifications of roads. Now, one thing to point out is that we have a lot of flexibility in the size of how we allocate space. So in this case, this is a local street example, but we may have a decorative strip or some other sidewalk treatment that can be varied in size. So we have a 60-foot right-of-way, but if we get onto a road that, say, is a local road or a road that has a constraint, meaning it can't be built to its full width, we do have a lot of flexibility in adjusting how wide that planter strip is between the curb and the sidewalk. And in some cases, and with the support of the downtown team, we thought very kind of broadly about how could we use that strip area for better use as a pedestrian. So on Oregon Avenue, you'll notice that the sidewalks are actually about 10 or 11 feet wide in some places, and then they're constrained down to 6 or 7 feet where there are planters or tree wells or sidewalk furniture or some similar amenity. However, it's really nice to have that wide, broad sidewalk because it encourages, one, people to walk instead of drive their car around. And then two, it allows different groups of people to walk side by side or to pass each other, and it's comfortable so that everyone feels like they have space on that sidewalk. So another thing that's really nice about this type of flexibility is like when cities are talking about how to help local businesses or downtown businesses in particular that are struggling with how can they open during COVID. One of the things that cities have started doing is to look at how they use that wide sidewalk area, in some cases even using parking spaces to open up areas and opportunities for outdoor seating. So the design has a lot of flexibility and a lot of opportunity in how it's applied. So we looked at a typical intersection, and I won't spend too much more time on this because I think a lot of folks have already seen these images. But we've got a lot of roads that change their designation as they move through downtown, and we also have some roadways that have different amenities depending on where they're located. So north or south of the edges of the district, but also areas that might have to provide, say, a bike lane, but they may not be required to provide a bike lane. So you'll notice that there's a major collector that turns into a minor collector, but it also includes bike lanes. So you might not see the difference in the road as stark changes between the two. However, there is this sort of thinking through how we apply that to different areas of the downtown zone. So I did an inventory. And this is important because we have there are very strong feelings both in the conversations we had anecdotally with the downtown team and others, particularly business owners, and also respondents to our survey that looked at how many parking spaces do we have, and the big question is, do we have a parking problem? And I sometimes smile about this because there is no such thing as a downtown zone that does not have a parking problem. And if you don't have a parking problem, then there's not a lot of business going on downtown. So the good news is that we do have about 30 spaces on every block. it changes based on whether or not there are driveway accesses on those blocks. And right now, downtown commercial zone does not require any parking to be provided on site. So there's no private parking lot that's required with the development that's done in the downtown district. That's meant to be an incentive for development to be located centrally. We do have 344 spaces. I counted them myself. And I'd like to think that that's a very high number for the number of commercial businesses that we have. We do, however, have some concern or some ideas about how are we using parking. There are popular businesses that are very popular at certain times of the day, certain days of the week, and maybe not everyone who's parking there knows where they can find parking. There are a lot of folks coming from out of town or who may have trouble. We'll get back to this with wayfinding. But they may or may not know where there are options to park that are very close in proximity. However, they seem to be elusive. And then secondly, where are the employees parking? So some of the businesses have employees that drive to work. Thinking about where those employees park can have a big impact on how businesses are able to provide parking for customers. So that's something that we've learned from other communities that have had similar challenges or perceptions around parking problems. One of the concepts that came out very early in our outreach around downtown was that we really want to preserve the parking we have. So as development occurs, as we create new roadway designs, modernization of each roadway, we hope to preserve as many parking spaces as possible. So if we lose some, how can we include them back, or how can we put them back in a different way? Or better yet, how do we design the road so that it retains the same number? And then finally, what are some options for existing businesses or developers who might think that they need more parking? So we say there's no minimum, but that doesn't mean that there's no one else in the supply chain that decides whether or not a business might need parking. So we find often that banks require parking as a mandatory item, even if the city doesn't require them. So we looked at ways to creatively consider on-site parking. How can we count parking spaces that are in the right of way towards a parking minimum, let's say, if there is one. There are just some big questions that we discussed. And what we came to in the recommendations, and I guess I'll back up and say that there are some sections of this presentation that are meant to be recommendations that came out of this outreach effort that we did. And then there are other segments that the community we've already addressed. So things like street design standards, we're going to see some of the street design standards that are presented in this presentation that are going to be applied on A Street. So we're already in the process of applying some of the concepts. This is meant to institutionalize that for the other roads that come after it. The same thing is true of the housing work that I'll talk about in a moment. In the housing work, you all moved forward with development code changes back in March of this year that solidified work related to housing above downtown commercial and some of those other kind of enhancements of mixed use development. But one thing that I've been trying to investigate and settle on, and this is a good opportunity in the process of this presentation and after, to think about how we recommend parking standards for the downtown area if we would like to change them. And then secondly, how the modernization of some of these roads that we have on our capital improvement list might help to support the redevelopment of downtown. So to speak to the recommended parking standards, commercial uses were considered, and we thought, is there a size of commercial development that would necessitate adding parking on site? Are we kind of opening ourselves up to a real significant challenge if we say no parking is required at all and someone develops a 20,000 square foot facility with no on-site parking? Are we Are we kind of careening towards a disaster in that way? Or secondly, if we see a boom in residential development above ground floor commercial, will there be too many people trying to compete for those spaces that we eliminate opportunities for the businesses that might be located downstairs? I just for context, this is a quick one. I put up standards in other zones, so you'll see that we generally have spaces required per 1,000 square feet of a building. And then with residential uses, we require certain numbers of spaces based on the size of the units. I won't spend too much time on that, except to say that the conclusions or recommendations that we came to after the survey and the downtown team weighed in were a compromise. So looking at existing development and or potential new development, buildings that are built up to 10,000 square feet. So 10,000 square feet is the size of one of the Wise Women Herbals building is just shy of 10,000 square feet on Highway 99 at North Mill Street, excuse me. And so just for context, that's a good reference point. So anything up to that size in downtown, we felt, or at least the consensus was that those sizes of buildings, especially if they're commercial uses only, those can be accommodated with on-street parking. And that would be a really nice incentive for a developer to consider how to maximize the utility of a lot. Most of the lots in downtown are approximately 5,500 square feet. So if you imagine the corner of 2nd and A Street, that is a lot that's exactly 10,000 square feet, or just around that. And that kind of that lot could be developed based on this recommendation without any additional on-street parking, if it was purely commercial. Now, let's say that building wanted to be built, but it had housing above it. Now, we'd like to incentivize inclusion of housing upstairs in downtown commercial because of the multiplier effect, that there's so much opportunity to have people living downtown. They become immediately users and frequenters of all of the businesses adjacent, and they add a lot of vitality to the neighborhood. So if that's the case, is there a way that we can still accommodate parking needs? Because we know that not everyone who rents an apartment in downtown Crestwell is going to be living car-free. We have a long way to go, I think, in terms of evolving our options before we're able to really earnestly say that that's a feasible or likely scenario. But it doesn't have to be the same number of parking spaces as a typical residential development. And so I presented to the downtown team, and I think we got some pretty good feedback on it, that cutting the unit requirements basically in half could represent a compromise for the downtown district. So, for example, in that same 10,000 square feet, if the upstairs of that commercial building, let's say, included 3 two-bedroom apartments, they would be required to provide 3 on-site parking spaces, just for context, instead of what would typically have been 6 on-site parking spaces. So we're looking at how, I guess, in my perspective, we're looking at how do we maintain the incentive of locating downtown close in, while also making sure that we're not generating so much interest that we prevent commercial businesses from being successful. So here's an interesting concept that I worked with our city engineer to look at. We're looking right now at the corner of 2nd and D Street. For everyone who's been thinking about 2nd Street, this is a good preview. And this is right in front of the Crestwell Bakery, as you might be familiar, as well as the old schoolhouse across the street. And we're looking, basically the top of the picture is north, so that'll give you some orientation. So everything north of of D Street, remember, is part of the downtown district. Everything south of D Street is residential. And you'll notice that the roadway design changes between the two. The bulb outs and what's shown are some angled parking pockets, some carved out pockets that basically, in this case, to give you a scenario, if a business decided that and granted, businesses have a great opportunity right now because we haven't designed the street yet. But if they decided that they really needed more parking than what would be provided in a parallel parking scenario, we could provide an alternative. And so I challenged our engineering team to come up with a design alternative that could provide slightly more parking spaces without having to provide them on site, because not every site has the ability to provide parking. And in this case, we looked at ways to, and if I could, I might be able to even zoom in if I am skilled enough here. We looked at how to make the design of the right-of-way match the opportunity for parking. And in fact, in order to make this feasible, we would actually, if a business owner were to desire it, we would ask that they dedicate approximately 10 feet of their frontage to the right-of-way to provide more parking. So in this case, they'd get 5 spaces angled in rather than, say, 3 parallel parking spaces. And the same is true across the street. It wouldn't require, as we would balance the dedication so that one side of the street would be more inset to those who are requesting it. So this would be something that would be an option to new development or redevelopment of a downtown property. And it's just as an idea to kind of keep the look and feel of the sidewalks and the street while also trying to maintain some flexibility around parking. Any questions so far? Great. We're smoothly sailing right along. The next topic that was brought up to the downtown team was wayfinding. Wayfinding is a kind of a fancy way of talking about signage and directions. So you think about communities you visited that have a branding for downtown or a style of signs, kiosks that show maps of the community, a variety of ways to help people navigate. Typically, wayfinding is oriented to folks that aren't from town, so visitors and guests and people who wouldn't necessarily be familiar with where everything is. The downtown team took a look at it, and I think we asked several questions about it in the survey. I think what is clear is that there is a strong interest in developing a wayfinding strategy for the downtown district. It wasn't something that we dove into far enough to be able to come up with a concept like a graphic or a design or something like this, but we did agree. I think what we heard, there was consensus on that we really ought to think mostly about using street furniture or benches, and I'll kind of show some creative options, just some unique ideas that came up in our research, but using street furniture and benches and trash cans and all kinds of things to look at how do we help people navigate the downtown area of our community. There are several questions still out there of what should it look like, how ubiquitous should the application be, are there certain places that should be identified as locations in the wayfinding? That's a little bit of could be a sensitive topic about who gets a sign and who doesn't. And we didn't really get into the details of that. So one of the recommendations that will come out of the downtown plan will be a recommendation to pursue a wayfinding or some kind of branding process whereby the city can identify some kind of style or graphic or colors that signify downtown and kind of alert folks to the fact that you're entering the commercial district of Cresswell. And sometimes this is achieved by simple things like tree wells instead of those decorative strips, like the planter strips. Sometimes this is the width of the sidewalk and a type of style of light. It's a different kind of street light. In some places, it takes the form of little riders that go on top of street signs. So it can be done in a variety of ways, a variety of intensities and styles. And though we didn't determine one in particular that was overarching, nearly everyone that we engaged agreed that downtown Crestwell could really use some kind of branding. So finally, I already covered this. So basically that this wayfinding effort really ought to be a component of our ongoing economic development efforts. So as we start working through some of the local economic development topics, wayfinding certainly could be one of those elements. And so I don't have any more slides on the public facilities or the housing, but I would speak to those separately. The housing work, and as I mentioned, we've already covered a lot of it, emphasize the inclusion of housing above ground floor commercial as an ideal form for the downtown district. I'll turn my video back on so that you all can see me while I talk. It was certainly agreed that there's huge opportunity for housing to be located in the downtown area of Crestwell. There's a confluence of factors. One is that Crestwell's housing needs analysis identified that smaller units that could essentially be more affordable would be really beneficial to our housing choice, our variety or spectrum of housing choice. And where better to include those than upstairs above a ground floor development or a commercial shop, sometimes above a coffee shop or a restaurant or somewhere that's sort of a symbiotic time usage. So a business that's occupied often or visited during the day, with housing that provides housing for folks who typically return home in the evenings. And there are a number of factors. One is a multiplier effect of business frequency. So what I mentioned before of everyone who lives above a coffee shop becomes a pretty frequent flyer of that coffee shop. Two, that there are some safety and security opportunities with folks living downtown. A lot of concern of commercial business owners in districts that are purely commercial, that have no housing, often express, and this is not typical of our community, but it is more broadly studied in city planning, that that folks who own businesses in commercial districts often say that they experience they could experience a lot of crime or vandalism or things that happen simply because no one was around to see. And it would be really, I think, beneficial to the community to have folks living in closer proximity to those businesses downtown, especially as the district begins to develop a little bit farther. Eyes on the street is sort of what it's called. And this concept that when there are people around to see something, typically people say something. So that's just a component of the symbiotic relationship between housing and ground floor commercial. There were some standards that the Planning Commission recommended and that you all agreed with out of those design standards that said, okay, if you're going to build purely residential in downtown, then you really ought to consider building to a higher density. And those standards specified that if you do build a purely residential structure, that the minimum density is 12 units an acre. And so with that same 10,000 square foot example, I believe the calculations came out to 4 units, 10,000 square feet being approximately a quarter of an acre. So you can kind of see that there are some opportunities there to provide housing in the downtown zone that's perhaps smaller, more affordable, and could also provide opportunities for live-work units where folks have housing above an office space or above a component of their housing that's connected, that they meet with clients or they use as an office that's public facing. So that's a big vision of the Planning Commission's and will be certainly translated into the downtown plan. And then finally, public facilities were considered firehouse, if we ever see perhaps like a post office reestablished in downtown, or any other community buildings that might support, like, for example, the old schoolhouse could turn into some kind of community resource building. Anything that's a publicly facing building, a civic institutional building. There was a little bit of trepidation from the folks that we engaged with that a civic building could be built and not really have a lot of interface with the public. So particularly the establishment of large parking lots and spaces that store like vehicles. I guess an example might be a police department that stores its fleet cars in a parking lot. We see this in Springfield and their downtown justice center and in other places locally. There was some concern expressed both by the Planning Commission and the downtown team that those places become fairly inaccessible, especially when they're in the heart of a downtown, which we would like them to be in downtown because that makes them available for the most people. However, how their property interfaces with the street and how it interfaces with other businesses that might be around it is very important. So there are some considerations that have carried through the engagement process, including considering the heights and styles of fences. So not allowing fences that are, I don't know, for lack of a better word, ugly or may not be very aesthetically pleasing, but then that are not menacing, that don't look like they're trying to. It's not a jail facility that's located downtown, so let's make it feel kind of nice and welcoming. Ways to do that are to have certain kinds of setbacks for certain heights of fences. You might also remember that our fence standards in other parts of the community require that if you want to build a big fence really tall, you must also step back from the sidewalk to allow more space. Usually there are plantings involved in that. The downtown team expressed an interest, and the Planning Commission concurred that providing some kind of public amenity like a plaza or a planted area or some kind of seating availability like a bench. You see this in a variety of places around our region where downtown areas often provide these kinds of amenities and integrate them into their design. So something that we might consider including in the downtown plan as well, it was very strongly recommended, was that we include those types of amenities as part of the civic design requirement. So thanks for staying with me, team. That's the whole presentation that I have for you tonight. It was meant to be an update to where we've been and how we got here, and the findings and some conclusions. And I'd love to hear, first of all, your thoughts about some of the material I just presented. And then secondly, I can provide you kind of a next steps and a timeline, but I'd first like to hear a little bit more about first impressions.
Okay, counselors, I'll open it up and people raise your hand and let me know when you want to talk. I will recognize. Well, I don't see any hands up, so I will go ahead and share that I really enjoyed it, Maddie. I think the idea of, having all these factors considered in weighing into the part of our downtown plan, 12-block radius, whatever, I think is outstanding. I really like the thought processes going into the wayfinding, because I've heard that many, many times before. Where do I find the bakery? Where do I find the library? Where do I find other things? So I think that all of those are really going to be great. And I was surprised when you told us that there were 344 spaces in that area. That is shocking to me. It really is. And we have to understand too that part of it is residential. So certainly a certain portion of that is going to be taken up by residential parking and that type of thing. But yeah, I thought this was a really great report, and I thank everyone for being involved, and the downtown plan team working with city staff and the Planning Commission. Great job. Great job. So counselors, come on, throw your comments in here.
Got my hand up there.
Okay, there. I can't see you, Kevin. I apologize. Oh, now I do. There you go. Go ahead, sir.
I'll turn on my camera here so you guys can see me. So
Martha,
there I
you'll be
slide
next.
in. So yeah, I'm also excited about this and seeing some of the things that you had mentioned that we could do, like the tree well. I think is which is still on the screen, is kind of cool. I like seeing things like that, and wondered if that might even be a way for us to, once we kind of start finding our way with the equity pieces of things, maybe reinforcing some of our community values through things like this would be kind of a neat kind of add-in. So I had a couple of questions related to Second and D, the bakery. That was pretty cool looking. I like the angled parking in, and I thought that looked like a really neat design. And then thinking of the number of spaces that they would actually get there, and then the potential ones there across the street, I can still see, of course, that there will probably be times of the day when the bakery is even busier than those spaces will accommodate. And you mentioned that there are other places, obviously, that people can find and park. Obviously, they don't want to, especially if it's raining. And so their tendency is to park in front of driveways and other places. And I hear this all the time. So I would be really remiss if I didn't ask if there was anything that we could do to encourage the parking, to not spill over into neighbors' driveways or whatever the case may be there. But also maybe even to discourage people from doing that. That, there are signs maybe that say, don't park here, you're going to get fined or something like that. I want to be able to protect our residential neighbors in this process too. So that would be my first question.
Sure, I'd be happy to provide a little insight into the conversation that we had about that topic. Kevin, thank you very much for bringing it up, and you rest assured that it didn't go unnoticed in our discussion, both as a downtown team and also in the comments provided by the survey responses. It's true, the parking situation can be inconvenient. I guess I said it in the downtown team discussions, and I'll continue to say it, is that we're lucky to have a business that's so busy that that demands so much parking. It's a huge asset to our community, brings a lot of folks in. That said, it does pose challenges to the neighborhood. And one of the things that we spoke with the Tunnels about, in particular, especially in the interim, before we're able to provide a more permanent solution to where people can park, what areas are driveways that shouldn't be blocked, and mailboxes and stop signs, most importantly. And one of the suggestions that we came up with was that the bakery actually accesses an alley behind the building. And in fact, that alley exits to C Street, right by the city's parking lot. It's actually the parking lot for the community center. So that's kind of one opportunity that we hope that the Tunnels will explore in the future, is to provide some kind of walking path. I think the challenge that we've heard from visitors is that they don't feel comfortable walking on D Street, because, particularly in the winter, because the road is very narrow and the shoulders of it drop off pretty substantially into stormwater ditches that are quite muddy in the winter. And so our thought was, how do we get people on a sidewalk from a parking space to the bakery? And so we thought there could be some wayfinding, but maybe on a private scale, where little sandwich signs or something, follow this yellow brick road path to the bakery or something like that, that kind of helps bakery visitors realize that there are a number of other options for parking, both on C and First. I mean, I sit at that corner and eat lunch a lot, and there are hardly any people parked there. I go around the corner to go, stop by the bakery for an item, and it is jammed. And I think to myself, it's 1 block away. I mean, gosh, how could it, what's going on here? And I think it's just a question of awareness. So I've tried to work with Heidi a little bit to maybe, put up a sign at the door that said, have trouble finding a spot, look here, or, show like an interpretive map about where there are other options for parking. And I really hope that she does pursue that, because that could be a great, at least interim solution.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. I'm very glad to see that it is just within the scope and the focus of what we're looking at. So I appreciate that. And one of the other things that called out in my attention when I was reading some of the stuff were the beautification issue that was brought up, and how, I know that that's kind of separate from streets, but at the same time, it kind of plays a big part in that. And I think that I'd be interested in knowing, and it doesn't really have to be part of this conversation, about what kind of efforts that we can maybe make to help help businesses and help collaborate together to create some of that beautification effort that might help even attract more people, maybe even in the form of public art and murals. I know we have some, but maybe we can even get some more and people paint those for free. So.
Absolutely, Kevin. I think you bring up some great points. Beautification is something that I believe very strongly in, especially when it comes to, I guess I have a strong affinity for street trees. I think that they make streets look really wonderful. People notice them immediately. When you walk into a city that doesn't have trees, it's noticeable. It feels a lot different. And just as an anecdote, regarding driver behavior, people typically are a little bit more responsible when they realize that there are trees close in proximity to where they're driving. They tend to slow down more. And it's something about our field of vision. They've done a lot of research on including trees in the streetscape and what it does positively for driver behavior. It also helps pedestrians feel a little safer because it defines the space that they are meant to use. It provides a literal and figurative kind of form around the sidewalk area. So to your point, natural features, but also the physical features of improvements of facades is definitely a high point.
We need those trees for our lights.
Exactly.
That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Prochu. Councilor McReynolds, you're next.
Hi, I have my camera on as far as I can tell.
Yep.
I'm not sure why I'm not showing up. Maddie, thank you for thinking so creatively. I really appreciate the wayfinding element, and hope that maybe that can get us over the hump on folks thinking that parking is so difficult. I'm with you on there's a bunch of parking spots 10 feet away. Do you have any insight on where that psychology comes from? I'm from, the Portland mentality. I've planned my spot before I leave the house. This isn't a problem here, but it's perceived as such. So would wayfinding, maybe signage regarding parking, like you were talking about with the tunnels, do we have the ability to sort of force them to put up signs and be creative and proactive? These aren't just nice conversations, right? We're moving towards them actually helping with that part of it soon.
Yes, Councilor McReynolds. We are, I think, what's the phrase? Necessity is the mother of all invention.
Mm-hmm.
I think whether we ask or whether it's a feeling that most of the people who visit the bakery feel and express as consumers, I think we are likely to see some effort put into how do we help people find ways to safely park and access their favorite cinnamon rolls.
They're very healthy people. You see the gear on the cars and stuff. These are not folks that'll suffer walking a block.
Yeah, so I think it is, well, it's twofold. One is it's a lack of knowledge. So when folks drive into town, they don't know even how to find 2nd Street. I give directions more often at my lunch spot than I do actually, I think, eating my lunch. But that it's a good thing. what's interesting is it's a question of awareness, and then secondly, I think that there is maybe a perception that there's not a lot of busyness happening in our downtown, so you should be able to find a parking space right out front. And maybe that's a function of the bakery's success, that they are growing at such a rate that you can't always find a space out front. You might have to walk a block. So that's one thing. I think that there's a really good likelihood that people will start finding ways to find parking just out of necessity. And I think we can support them. I think one of the things that will absolutely support them and reduce a lot of the nuisance complaints that we hear about parking when we are able to install a curb on 2nd Street and reduce the amount of informal parking space that's identified there. When we put little hash marks on the ground and put red paint on a curb, it's a universal signal for you can park here, but you can't park here. And I'm afraid that without those universal signals, it's very challenging for visitors in particular to know where they're allowed to be and where they're not. So short of that, we've been dancing with this for many years, and you hear it in the concerns expressed. However, I would like to highlight that in our survey, the responses to the question of do you believe that there is a parking problem in downtown Crestwell, the answer was overwhelmingly no. 65% of people said, no, we do not have a parking problem in downtown Crestwell.
I'm really glad to hear that. But strangely enough, an old timer said to me just out of the blue the other day, oh yeah, parking in downtown's awful. And I don't even know how to frame that. So I'm glad, folks, you're thinking of ways to mediate that perception and to continue to have adequate and better than adequate parking. I like the compromises for businesses regarding development and how many spots they need to put together.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thanks.
Okay,
That's all.
Councillor Knutson.
Thank you, Maddie. So I guess going off of what the parking thing, I just wonder if better signage. It's like we don't have a lot of signage that says, hey, park here, park here. The curb, yeah, adding a curb and adding stripes and everything is definitely going to help. But especially around the bakery, we need to have specific signage for people to know. I mean, I know, okay, obviously just drive around the block and you'll find somewhere if I'm going somewhere, but people coming into town that don't know our town, it's that whole wayfinding and signage thing. And like, I think we talked about defining downtown. It's so weird when you know downtown's Oregon Avenue, but then you just look south on South 2nd and it looks like a residential. And I think people get really confused because it doesn't look like a downtown. So having a clearly defined sign, light poles, trees, curbs, benches, when you go to any other downtown, it's very defined, not just off of commercial. I mean, in a larger city, you see a bunch of commercial buildings and restaurants and things, but in smaller cities, it's clearly defined outline, and that's what we need. I think that's hopefully the goal to get to that point.
Yes, Councillor Knudsen, you're absolutely right. There is, again, going back to some to summarize or paraphrase some planning knowledge or research, is that when people don't perceive there to be something just next to or just beyond the main thoroughfare, often they don't take the time to explore it. And you'll see that commercial space and the desire to develop commercial space is really on streets that have high visibility. And if people aren't visiting those streets and aren't connecting from Oregon Avenue, say, to 2nd and A Street or south to Second and D, and they see these residential. I think that's what people get confused by, is they see these homes right up against, say, the dentist's office or somewhere else, and they think they got lost. They must have missed it. Because there's not this continuity of the street. And I'd like to, I guess I could paraphrase some conversation that we had at the Planning Commission level, which was that we think about what is the role of the city in developing a downtown district. And really, we're creating the garden bed for people to plant seeds in and grow businesses. So in that analogy, we need to kind of set the table and design what that garden bed looks like and what the outlines look like, so that businesses can feel confident that when they make an investment into that, planting those seeds, that they're going to get a return on that investment, and they're going to feel confident in doing so. So our efforts around, I guess I don't mean to push too much pressure on the street development, but it really does define, I think the combination between street development and wayfinding really does define the district. And it helps to clarify where the edges are formed. I would argue, we could take a survey of 10 or 20 randomly selected people who live in Crestwell, and I think we would get a variety of different answers about what is the downtown district. Right. So without those visual cues, it's really hard for folks to know, oh yeah, it ends at A or it ends at D or third, and what does that mean?
Right. So my second concern is, so I was on the downtown committee, and so I heard a lot of the business owners that are downtown and all their concerns, and Jessica from Farmlands can't get the building that Farmlands is in updated enough because the landlords, I mean, she just leases it from them, so the landlords don't want to put in the effort to update the building and to make it look better, and she can only do so much as a person that's leasing it, that she is having trouble convincing them. And I feel like if you look at our entire downtown, it's kind of shabby. It's not the nicest. I mean, the paint's chipping and the signage is bad and the windows are bad in some places. And it's like, how do we incentivize? I think we're beyond incentivizing, honestly. I'm kind of like, I don't think the incentives, whatever they are working. And how do we make property owners take care of their property so businesses want to come in and build their business? And I find it very frustrating. I don't know the answer. And we say we want to revitalize downtown and we want to beautify it and everything, but we can't force them. The landowners that owned all those buildings will do what they want because there's nothing in place to hold them accountable to actually keep up with their buildings or make sure that their tenants are taken care of. And it just sounds like their tenants are kind of getting upset. I mean, Noel Nash from the Chronicle was even there, and he was having difficulties with his landlord. So the business owners are struggling with the landowners. Mm-hmm. And I feel like we don't have an answer for them, yet we're trying to attract businesses to come, but we can't even protect them. I know that's a lot to take on, but
no, I'm sorry, Counselor, I can't begin to necessarily address your concern head on, but what I could say is that you did take some steps very recently to address, I guess, the lowest common denominator in the work that you did as a council to develop a derelict building ordinance. So when we find safety hazards or things that are really dangerous to the public, you now, I believe, have a tool that you can utilize in a way that's less onerous than it used to be. So you have at least one new tool in your toolbox. How do you inspire the ownership in downtown to invest in their properties is another story. we've struggled with this at the planning commission level for years, that how do we inspire certain kinds of redevelopment to occur? There's residual value of certain properties. There's residual value of certain homes in downtown that the land is worth almost as much as the improvement that is on it. And so we can't really figure out how to break the cycle of like, this is affordable housing that's located downtown, but the property is so valuable. How do we see, what's the straw that's going to tip the scale that's going to really kind of facilitate the renaissance that you speak of? I think that there are ways that we can nibble around the edges. I don't think it's going to be, I think it's going to be an incremental solution, but I think our first step is to manage and work with the space that we do have, which is the roadway, and hope that that inspires confidence in ownership. And I think what we'll find, just in conversations briefly with some of the folks on staff and others who have done work similar to this to revitalize areas of other communities, is that the work that's done on the road has a funny way of supporting or increasing the value of properties it fronts. And sometimes that also has an interesting way of inspiring building owners to decide what is it they really want to do with this property. Right now, we're at status quo, and everything's kind of coasting in a way that nothing's changed for a long time. So, you know, we have a motivated business owner in a very popular business location that, you know, what's the thing that's going to change that trajectory to maybe inspire that person to sell the property or to enhance the property or perhaps consider redeveloping the property. And I think a lot of it was going to have to do with the ground itself and the value of the land vis-a-vis the improvement. And then secondly, it's going to be all of us as a community inspiring those owners to really kind of prod them the way that, you know, if your neighbor has some really ugly junk in their front yard, one way to deal with it is to call the city and complain, but another way is to go approach them and inspire them and say, hey, you know, like, I'm planting a garden in my front yard. You know, wouldn't it be neat if you consider doing the same? Or your family would certainly enjoy a place to play. You know, maybe you could think about moving those, you know, unused items to a place that's a little less visible. And then we could all enjoy this nice, beautiful, you know, front of our homes. And sometimes it works. I can't say it works all the time, but it, you know, there are hard solutions and soft solutions to every problem. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, Council, on how we can, as a city, inspire more of that.
I guess I'm just saying I'm kind of done with soft solutions. I mean, being on city council for 4 years and seeing, in my eyes, zero movement on, you know, businesses come and go, but they don't really stay, the new businesses that have come in, and hearing from business owners that have been here a long time and the struggles that they go through, I'm kind of fed up with them having to deal with it. So I'm more like, let's get this ball rolling and let's get some real traction to try to help our local businesses out and increase the activity in downtown and increase our pride, I guess, in downtown. I mean, we're the friendly city, but it looks kind of shabby sometimes. And there's a lot of vacant buildings. And I wonder why. I mean, I know why, but it's like, I would like to see more of that. And like I said, I don't have the solution, but I would like to hear some, and I'd like to have some options going forward to be more proactive. All right, that's all.
Okay, thanks very much, Amy. I see 2 hands raised, and I have not heard from Councilor Inman or Councilor Drago, so I'm wondering if they want to weigh in first.
I don't have anything.
Okay, thanks, Judy. How about you, Misty?
I don't think I have anything extra to add. However, I do like the signage, the wayfinding. I think that would be a tremendous help with people visiting, you know, and knowing where to park as the options. So But other than that, I don't think I have anything else to add at this point.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Kevin, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I'll just tag on. I think that Maddie kind of mentioned it, that there is kind of a domino effect that happens, and the investment really does drive investment. So I see that there is already kind of a domino starting to fall in Crestwell. We've seen the investment in the shopping center across from the gas station, and now we're going to see the gas station itself. So when we start to see those kinds of things, there's a kind of a trickle effect, or we'll start to see others that say, "Oh, well, this is kind of like looking like a nice place now. Now we'll do it," and it'll keep moving down the street. So I like that, and I think that that's kind of where that beautification thing comes in. Maybe we might be able to have some kind of a deal where we get some other businesses to chip in. We maybe come up with a fund and we identify a place in town that could use a really good paint job and maybe some minor fixes, a window replacement or something like that. And you do that and it's like, well, now that's looking pretty good. Maybe I'll move into the place next door or something like that. So, but I wanted to ask one other question, and that's more along the signage and the things like that. You mentioned the business district, and I have no idea, this might just be off the rails crazy idea, but sometimes when I'm rolling into a town and I see that there's been a reduction in speed, this is a business district, and so now it's, instead of 25, it's 20 going through this part of town. I don't know if there's any opportunities there, but sometimes just a feel can change just by the speed that you're driving through town. So throw that on the table.
Yes, Councillor Prochu. In fact, I think the primary economic development strategy of the City of Sisters is to slow everybody down and make you look at all those beautiful quotes.
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Procher, you finished?
I'm finished. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McReynolds.
Just two comments, please. Thank you, Mayor Zetterval. So one, I just, in defense of our public works in City Hall, we've really, from the City Hall point of view, we've made a lot of improvements of Oregon Avenue and our curb appeal downtown, and we've improved a lot in the last 10, 15 years. And there was a big improvement project about 12 years ago that added those cool light stands that we enjoy now. So we've made improvement over the last decade and a half that I've been observing. And I just want to throw out there, along the wayfinding and the beautification and changing things passively through how they look. Perhaps there's a way to exploit the fact that Crestwell was originally, that 4x4, 4 blocks by 4 blocks. Excuse me. Maybe there's like a super the 16 blocks of our super historical district, and somehow we can make that part of how we identify. This is our downtown. This is where Crestwell started. I don't know if that would be a way to kind of add a little zhuzh to the idea of the signage and the wayfinding and identifying. Have you thought about having an historical district actually defined as such? I'm sorry I haven't brought it up sooner.
No, Councillor McReynolds, you're on track with a lot of things. You are correct that the downtown district, those 60, I believe it's 12 blocks because it's 3 streets, 4x4. And I think what we will find, or what we do find, is that a lot of them are some of the oldest lots in town, part of the original plat of Crestwell. And we also, when I've asked or when we've talked about it, a lot of folks often think about that Fruitlands Arch and some of the other iconography that's common or popular from what our recollection of our past is. There are lots of opportunities to incorporate that into some kind of vision for graphic design or a look and feel of the downtown district. We have considered a historical district. Unfortunately, a lot of what's left of our historic structures are residential, and it's hard sometimes to work with folks in private residences to maintain them as historic buildings. When there are a lot of commercial buildings, you know, like I think about like downtown Baker City or places that have some really, or even Cottage Grove, that have really iconic commercial buildings that have survived, you know, the fire and all of the other things that took them out in years past. They've had more success in establishing a historical district. And we did do a historic building survey. We had a student from the University of Oregon's architecture department come down and do a study of historical buildings. And that we do have that. To be honest, I don't know if we've heard a lot of support or a groundswell of interest in seeing that be instituted. But we do have those provisions.
Or perhaps I think that's regulatorily a little more heavy-handed than I was picturing. I was picturing more like an aesthetic thing where there's some sort of, the sidewalks are marked out to show the boundary. There's some way of just saying, hey, guess what? You're within and now you're without the original footprint. Maybe just some way to say this is kind of a special space in here that's more just informational and gently put out there, as opposed to when I wasn't thinking in terms that as big as a planner would think.
Got it. So to that end, I guess what comes to mind, if I understand you correctly, are things like, you know, what used to be here, you know, like if we looked at the Sanborn maps or something, and there used to be like an old stablery or a firehouse or something, you know, like these boxes that the Historical Society, I think in Eugene has done, or Springfield have done, to put like pictures of what used to be here, what the road used to look like. Those things are really neat, at least to someone who likes history things.
It is. And the oldest house in Cresswell is across the street and down from the bakery by a handful. Maybe they would put up with a little plaque, or I don't know, just an idea.
Something, a little value added to our wayfinding and signage ideas.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Okay, Council, I think we've spent enough time on this. Maddie, did you get the information that you needed?
I did, thank you, Mayor. And I'd just like to add that that I appreciate, first of all of your comments and thinking through this. And secondly, I do hope to have a document to share with you at some point soon, hopefully before the end of this calendar year. You'll have to accept my apology that we've had a flurry of current development applications that have torn me away from getting this completed. So I appreciate your patience. It's sort of a slow burn.
That's okay. The work that you're doing as far as future planning and so forth is going on right now is certainly welcome, and we really appreciate the work you've done on that as well. So, okay, Council. So we'll move on to our next agenda item, and that will be item 4A, which is entitled Equity and Inclusion. And I would like to take the opportunity to introduce a guest that we have tonight, and his name is Kazim Zaidi, I believe it is, and I apologize for butchering the name. He does like to be known as Kaz, or be called Kaz. Is Kaz still available?
I am indeed.
Very good, sir. Thank you very much. I hope I did not butcher your name too bad.
It's Kazim Zaidi, so
Zaidi.
You were pretty close.
I was pretty close.
But yeah,
okay.
I go by Kaz.
Okay. So I would like to introduce Kaz, and he will go through a conversation and share some things in regards to this topic. Manager Amberg and I have had the opportunity, and I believe Councillor Prochu has had the opportunity to have conversation, and Kevin's had training with Kaz, and I think he's got some very excellent viewpoints, and will kind of introduce the subject to us at this point. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Kaz.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, councillors, for having me here today. I will tell you a little bit about myself and the work that I do, and then we can have a discussion about some possibilities for the city of Cresswell moving forward. So, as you can probably tell by the accent, I'm originally from London in the UK. I came out to this part of the world in 2016. I met and married a farm girl from Silverton and was moved down here to be at the University of Oregon, where I was doing a PhD in political science. But then I became a father for the first time and suddenly started to reconsider my graduate student salary. In the UK, I spent about 12 years working in politics and community engagement, primarily in local government in London, and primarily in majority minority districts of London. So during that period, I developed a firm sense of how equity operates, how equity needs to in local government systems. And then through my master's, I was able to translate some of the experience that I had into the American context.
You're cutting out. You're cutting out pretty badly.
Marginalization. Sorry, my internet connection hasn't been great. Can you hear me now?
Not real well, no.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If you just give me one moment, I'll try and fit. How about now? That seems to be better, doesn't it?
That seems to be better. Yes, it does.
Yep. Just give me 1 second, and I'll make sure that nobody else is using the internet, and then I'll be back with you.
Okay, sounds great. So in this brief musical interlude, we can all sing along, right?
Well, can I jump in here a little bit?
You certainly may, Michelle.
Yeah, the mayor and I got in touch with Kaz at the invitation of actually Councillor Prachu. He had worked with Kaz, and it was really wonderful to meet with him and hear his story, and hopefully he'll be back and be able to share that with you. Based on that, you know, there's a lot that we're looking at when we talk about race and equity and gender and age, and it started to sort of solidify with me that we're not just looking at a race issue, we're looking at an inclusion issue. So I sat down and I took a whack at drawing a resolution up that talks about how the city of Cresswell is an inclusive place. And that's something for you to consider tonight, as well as the draft ordinance that would create an equity commission. And there's probably needs to be a lot of talk about these two topics to make sure that they encompass everything that you intended. I know that my original task was to come back with something that addressed race, but it seems to be, when I was writing it, I didn't feel comfortable ignoring some of the other issues that we're looking at now too in our culture. So that's why these are a little bit broader, but I'm more than happy to narrow them down if that's what you would like. I also wanted to let you know that I have a few copies of the December Oregon Historical Quarterly that I'd be happy to make available to you. Yeah, the mayor is showing it right now. It's focusing on race. It's something that racism actually in Oregon. I've read about half of it. It's a really good read. And I would encourage you to pick it up and have a read if you don't know about Oregon's history in that area. It's pretty eye-opening in some ways. I also have copies of White Fragility and How to Be an Anti-Racist here at City Hall if you'd like to read those as well. Make those available. And of course, as I said before, I also have the So You Want to Talk About Race book. So those are all resources for you that are available if you want to follow up on any of these topics. And I see Kaz is back, so I will give the floor back to him.
I just want to thank you, first of all, Michelle, because you covered one of the key opening points that I wanted to make, which is that talking about race is very important, and race is the nexus where a whole bunch of other exclusions come together. But we can't understand race in isolation. We can't simply look at the person's skin color and not see all of the other ways in which various groups have been excluded, not least 50% of the population as women for a very long time and to this day. And so in order to make a place, I guess, an anti-racist institution or an anti-racist city, there are a whole bunch of other exclusions we also need to tackle. And race, as I said, is the most pressing at this point in time. And it has been long overdue to look at this particular form of exclusion. But as Councillor Prosciu will be able to say, he's taken the belonging training at the City of Eugene. The bit of my introduction that I didn't get to is that I currently work as the multicultural liaison in the Office of Human Rights and Neighbourhood Involvement, which is directly under the city manager. And a lot of the work that we've been doing, it's actually coincidental timing. It had been planned for some time. It just so happens that we're delivering it this summer. Is something called the belonging training, which is a 2-part, or if you are a senior manager, a 3-part series where we take people through some of the basic concepts of what it means to truly feel like you belong in a place. And from there, we move on to some examples of how people have been made to feel that they don't belong. And in particular, looking at the history of systemic exclusion. One thing that's very important to me as a practitioner of equity work is to draw a distinction between individual bigotry and systemic racism. So for a very long time, arguably since the civil rights movement, a lot of people have believed that the systemic stuff has been solved. And what we have is isolated pockets of people that have unpleasant opinions. And whilst we certainly do have people that have those opinions, we also have a system that has been set up on exclusion. And the most obvious ways that this takes place, there's a couple that I can give you. The first is the war on drugs. And I believe I told the mayor this when we met, and he was very surprised to hear this. I actually didn't have the precise statistic to mind, Mayor Zettervall, but in the war on drugs, powder cocaine and crack cocaine are the same thing. They are as different as powdered sugar and crystallized sugar. But the mandatory minimum 5-year sentence for crack cocaine is triggered at 5 grams. And for powder cocaine at 500 grams. And crack cocaine is almost exclusively used by African-American communities, and powder cocaine almost exclusively white communities. And so you could have someone that had a small amount for personal use, and you could have someone that had 499 grams that they were intending to sell. And the two people would see completely different outcomes. So that's one example. Another example I can give you, which some of you may know about, is the practice of redlining. I was actually doing some research last week, and I was looking through some of the old deeds in the city of Eugene. And a lot of these deeds have what are referred to as racial covenants, where part of the deed says that I will not sell this house on to someone other than a member of the Caucasian race. And what things like that do is, first of all, they have an obvious exclusion, but then they have a long-term generational exclusion. And that generational exclusion families where people have not been able to build up generational wealth that they can pass on to their children. There's a whole series of events that I'm not going to go into in any detail, but when an African-American family moved into a neighborhood, the real estate agents would terrify the surrounding white people into selling their houses cheap. And they would then sell those houses on at a massive markup to African-Americans who couldn't afford the mortgages, who ended up subdividing the houses, degrading neighborhoods over time. And of course, people would blame this on genetics or culture. But the truth is that it was very much a result of public policy. And so in the conversations that I've been able to have, there's a couple of ideas that have been discussed. The first of which is to hold some virtual town halls, because I think it's very important, especially in the highly charged atmosphere that we've been in for the last little while, to talk about racism by separating out the individual bigotry from the systemic stuff. Because when you say somebody is a racist or somebody is benefiting from a racist system, they get very understandably defensive. And often they will say, I don't see race or I don't see color. And that sounds like a positive sentiment. But the problem is that if you don't see color and you don't see race, you don't see those deep historic inequalities that are sadly baked into our system. And having been born in the United Kingdom and spent some time now in the United States, I can say that it certainly isn't an American problem, isn't just an American problem. In the UK, it's a far more subtle system, partially because of the fact that the majority of people of color in the UK for most of the life of the empire weren't actually in Britain, they were elsewhere. Whereas in America, you almost have this system of having two separate countries on top of each other. One that it's inhabited by Black people, by Latinx people, by Native Americans, and the other one that is inhabited by people who are admitted into this construction of whiteness. And I call it a construction because if you go back 150 years, the Irish weren't really considered white, Eastern Europeans weren't really considered white, and it's only as other populations of color have grown that the idea of whiteness has expanded so that some kind of demographic advantage can be maintained. So that's my basic sort of explanation of the kind of work that I do. I think that a series of town halls, we're actually developing a number of different things with the city at the moment. There's one series we're working on with neighborhood associations, which I think would be very useful. At some point, I hope there will also be the possibility for Creswell City staff and councillors to take the belonging training. We need to get through the whole of the city of Eugene first. But having had an initial conversation with people in my department and in the city manager's office, it should be possible to buy that training in for city staff, for councillors, and possibly for people who are on boards and commissions as well. And I want to thank you all for showing this interest. I was very excited to see Maddie Phillips's presentation on the regeneration of downtown, because that's precisely the kind of opportunity where we can start introducing, Proshu said, he's been stealing all my best lines, yeah, the ability to introduce equity considerations more deeply into the city. The kind of thing that springs to mind is, for example, if we do have some kind of civic building, giving over some space to community groups that specialize either in working with communities of color or which are particularly harshly felt in communities of color. And then I think there's another element, which is simply the reckoning with our history. And in Oregon, we kind of have two versions of history. I'm sure all of you will know, and from the work that Michelle has done, it's laid out very clearly in the motion, that it's very easy to think, oh, there's no racism in Oregon because there are no Black people. And that's a sentiment I've heard expressed to me out here. Now, that isn't by accident. And sadly, because of that fact as well, a lot of people who are not racists, who don't have a racist bone in their body, didn't see racism occurring, because if it doesn't occur in front of you, and it's less likely to, if you are not a person of color or you don't know a person of color, then you might think, yeah, we beat this, that there was a narrative that goes from the abolition of slavery to the abolition of the Jim Crow laws and the civil rights movement to the election of a Black president. And we can say, well, it looks like this is over. And that is one version of history. But sadly, underneath that, there is a version where various forms of exclusion have been allowed to continue over time. And I think it's also, I think I'll make this my final point before I open out to some questions. It's important to say that racism is not a partisan issue. It is certainly true that at this point in history, one party is avowedly anti-racist, and another party is, should we say, has some distance to travel. And what that demonstrates to us is not that this party is racist and this party is not, but that racism exists in society and people may or may not be willing to take advantage of it in order to get elected. And I think that's very important to say at this point, because I think there are a lot of people who have been boxed in to a sense of believing that being an anti-racist is against their, the political culture in which they operate. And one of the things that I really want to try and break down is that particular barrier, because I think that the idea that, if someone is a conservative or if they belong to a particular faith denomination, that they can't be an anti-racist is really damaging and frankly untrue. I think we can all be anti-racists, and it doesn't say anything else about any of our other convictions. It should simply be a fact. So that's my last point. And with that, if there are any questions, I'd like to hand over.
Okay, thanks, Kaz. Really appreciate that. So for clarity, can you give your brief description of anti-racist? Are you there, Kaz?
Around trying to perpetuate. Not being a racist is you're not going around actively perpetuating racism. An anti-racist is somebody that sees that there are deep racial inequalities in our society, and that those are the sins of our forefathers. And that in order to make this a truly equal and accessible society, we need to find where those inequalities are, and we need to address and challenge systems that benefit some people more than others. Not simply those overt expressions, not just the thing disparaging comment. We need to go beyond that, and we need to look at the systems around us to see how they exclude people, if they exclude people, as well as doing some deep work within ourselves. There is an extent to which all of us have some form of racist conditioning. My family is originally Indian. And as part of that, there is a strong attachment to a caste system, which operates functionally. You will find in various communities of color, colorism, where people who are lighter are seen as better and people who are darker are seen as worse. At the moment, the real problem, the first definition of racism that I ever heard is that it's prejudice plus power. And so the reason why European Americans or the white community is particularly singled out is because that is where the majority of the power is, not necessarily where the majority of the prejudice is. I think human beings tend to be uniformly, prejudiced or not. I don't think that that's something that breaks down according to any particular background or culture. And being an anti-racist means recognizing those facts in the world and in public policy and in our culture, recognizing them in ourselves, and then actively moving to do something about them.
Okay, very good, sir. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions to Kaz, and then we're going to work on the, talk about the resolution and the ordinance. So I see one hand up, and that it looks like it's Councilor McReynolds.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize I had a hand up, but I would make a comment. Thank you, Mayor Zettervall. Thank you, Kaz, very much for joining us. In the past, it always seemed to me that the onus for my education was on the poor person receiving the short end of whatever stick I didn't even know existed. So I really like that we're pursuing growth on our own as our own responsibility. And I appreciate the opportunities that we might have coming up in the very near future. That's all I wanted to say. Sorry, I didn't realize I had my hand up. Thank you, sirs.
Yeah, thank you much. Okay, councilors, any other questions for Kaz? Well, I don't see or hear anything at this point, Kaz. Would you mind hanging around for a little bit, and we'll be discussing this resolution and ordinance. And if councilors have questions for you and or Michelle, we would ask for your input. Would that be okay, sir?
That's absolutely fine.
Okay, very good. Okay, Counselor, so let's go ahead and talk about the resolution that we have before us that we have to consider that Michelle has drafted. And I'm not going to make any comments at this point. I want counselors to make their own comments and considerations, and I will open it up for questions or comments. Any hands up? Any questions, comments? Well, based on that, Michelle, it sounds like you've done a really great job. Are you on the line, Michelle?
Yes, I am.
Okay, very good. Did you want to talk any further about this? I see Kevin had his hand up, so I'll come right back to you, sir.
I'm more than willing to address any concerns you might have. I did want to thank you, Mayor, for bringing the Historical Society Quarterly to my attention. That is, again, I'll say it. If you don't know the history of racism in Oregon, it's an excellent scholarly journal, fully researched, thoroughly footnoted, and full of just all kinds of eye-opening information. It was something that I believe was from the mayor's annual conference. They also had a speaker there from the Historical Society that talked, and I think we were able to make that available to all of you to watch. Was that I think I shared a link to that, and I hope you got a chance to watch that as well.
Okay, Councilor Prochu, go ahead, sir.
So first thing that I want to say is that as I started to read over the draft resolution was that it felt, first of all, kind of along the lines of what I want to be doing. I want to be able to make a strong statement about how I feel about racism, right? And then kind of the more that I got into it, I was looking at the title of the resolution, and I noticed that we didn't include race in any of the descriptors in the title. We do have ethnicities, so that's in there. And then if we look at the first section, it's very descriptive in terms of race. So what I'm recognizing here is I feel that the council, I sense that the council wants to make a strong statement about race. And at the same time, knowing that the equity piece is going to cover much more than race, I want to make sure that we have a good balance of what we're trying to do. So if we're going to say what we're excluding, then we're going to say that, and what we're including and what we want to achieve is there. I think that that would probably be my first comment on it, and then we kind of see where that leads the discussion.
I can answer that. Actually, it was very deliberate on my part. And the reason why is that race has a historical, the word race has a historical biological context that I don't think we want to continue to promote in this day and age. And I think that it is actually captured in the ethnicity and culture is a much more correct word. Race was designed by folks who wanted to perpetuate the idea that there was a superior race, and there were biological theories at the time that were put forth that assured that certain white individuals, particularly white males, were thought of as scientifically a superior race. And that is the term they used, was race. And so you have the white race, and then they came up with the inferior races. And so that's why I didn't want to use the term race. I don't think it's a good word to use. I think it's an old word to use. And I think, again, culture and ethnicity are more inclusive. And I think you can maybe say you don't want race, but I think you want to move towards something other than talking about all races being equal, because you're using this language that was developed in the first place to perpetuate this very unequal system.
Did I help you with your question, Kevin?
Cool. Yeah, it makes me realize, and I think that's kind of where my mind was going with it, is that it's deliberate and intentional. I'd be interested if Kaz would maybe want to weigh in on that, just out of curiosity, but maybe after we've heard from everybody else.
Yeah, let's entertain Kaz's comments on the race, the word race itself. When we hear from other counselors, I do see that Counselor Inman had her hand up.
Perfect, thank you. I just want to make the comment, Michelle, in the top part about abilities. I think that is an important piece. You know, there's this discussion that it's more than just race, that there's several different kind of layers and components, and I just appreciate putting that in there of the different abilities.
So you'd like a whereas that addresses abilities?
Well, I thought you had did further down.
It is in the title.
It is, and maybe I was looking.
Page 23, section 3, composition, the word ability is in line 19 of the second document, the Equity Commission.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also in section 3, page 22, line 69.
Right.
We mentioned ability.
Mm-hmm. It was just something that's not always commonly noted, and was appreciated that was there.
We can certainly add a whereas that addresses that.
Did you get your question answered, Misty?
I did. It was
All right.
more of a comment of
Okay.
awareness of people's different abilities.
And I appreciate that, having a disabled son in our family. I definitely appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Counselor Knutson had her hand up.
Yeah, I just want to echo Misty's comment. I think we should have that stated somewhere in there as a whereas, because I don't think a lot of us think about that. A lot of us that can walk on two legs or have two arms, or, you know, all the disabilities that somebody has. I mean, I think the trash can thing is a perfect example of people impeding the right of way of somebody that could be in a wheelchair or could have some sort of disability. And I want people to start thinking more outside of their own realm. And certainly somebody that has a disability would appreciate that too. And I want to include them as much as possible. So thanks, Misty, for bringing that up. My second comment is section 4, the Creswell City Council affirms diversity in our mission statement, annual goals, strategic plans, comprehensive plan, annual budget, training, and hiring process. I just wonder if we want to include city council, boards, commissions. I mean, we want this to cover anything that has to do with our city and all our volunteers. I just wouldn't want to exclude that.
Okay, and volunteer appointments?
Yeah.
To commissions and boards?
Yeah. I want all those volunteers to be included in when council appoints boards and commissions and volunteers. Council appoints other counselors sometimes when we have an open seat.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't all get elected in, we do have to appoint somebody. And I want us to go forward saying, okay, well, let's include them too. So, and then of course, you know me, number 77, Ember is still in there. I'm guessing it was some sort of September, December.
I figured it'd be September, October, November, December.
Oh, I see. I was like, Ember was left behind, but yeah, okay, I got it.
Saving a few keystrokes for the future. I get that. That's great. I really appreciate those comments, Misty, because I think that's absolutely correct. You know, I as the mayor am responsible for appointing a lot of people, and you know, I don't want us as a council to interview and give thumbs up for appointments, or you know, and I hadn't even thought about a council appointment too. I mean, there could be a possibility in the future that a council seat would become open, and you know, we as a council would be appointing another person to join us. So yeah, I think that is absolutely appropriate. I hadn't even thought of that at all. So excellent point. I have not heard from Councillor Drago. Do you have any comments, Judy?
I don't. I do agree with Misty though with the comment about the disabled and making sure we include them too. So thank you though.
Okay. All right. So we've heard from everybody at this point. So Kaz, would you like to talk in regards to that word that we discussed earlier, the race word?
Yep. It's a very tricky situation because we have a word that has no basis in science, that has basis in reality, a concept that makes no sense, but has an ability to impact the way that people experience their lives. Generally speaking, we are trying to, like at an intellectual level, move beyond that. So whilst I would say that it's important to recognize racism, to endorse the concept of race is problematic. And so I'm very much with the city manager in the approach that she's taken. But these things are all, it's very tricky because we need to recognize that it exists in the sense that it hurts people and excludes people without actually endorsing the concept as a theory or an idea. So my preference is to talk about racism, but then when we're talking about the people that experience racism, to talk about culture and ethnicity. So yeah, and I think it's, you may find others who have different opinions, but ultimately I think that it is the more valid, the more accurate from a social science and a biological science perspective, and that it's what we want to see going forward.
Very good, sir. Thank you very much. Okay, councilors, any further comments or questions about the resolution and before we move on to the ordinance? It looks like Martha has a question.
Yes, please. So, would it bear in the document having a statement that identifies why the word race is not used? Would a different group of people in the future look at that and go, "Hey, those knuckleheads dropped the word"? I think a part of showing our intentionality would be to say, because later we use the word racism. So we are still dipping our toes in that language pool. And this is a really important discussion because language, words define our world to a big degree. And this is part of the shifting stuff around us as we change, how we frame. I'm preaching to the choir with that. But maybe we add a sentence, I would trust Michelle to draft it, that just shows the word race is purposefully not used. And I really like Kaz's identifying that you speak about individuals, you speak in terms of ethnicities and culture, but when you're talking about this systemic problem, it's racism. Perhaps that could be part of the explanation, but I would suggest a statement. I also, since I have the floor, alphabet soup's hard. I think in the draft we should also, after we have the BIPOC definition parenthetically, I think we should have the LGBTQ for the future. I know right now I'm not even, yes, but I'm not sure I've got it right, and I've seen it with more letters also. So I think we should just, have an edit where we parenthetically explain that abbreviation too. That's all. Thanks.
Definitions of acronyms in government is certainly important for sure.
That one's a lot trickier.
Is it?
Yeah, that there is. I mean, people of color, BIPOC. Black, Indigenous, people of color, that one's easy. But like you said, the LGBTQ is always adding additional letters to it. There isn't one word that I could use to refer to that group and then define it with that.
I don't think you should, but I think you should just define what those letters are. You know, lesbian, bi, trans, gay, queer. I think.
Well, I could say gender identity, something about allowing people to express freely their gender identity, and then in parentheses put LGBTQ, etc. Is that?
If I may jump in, people increasingly use LGBTQ plus to indicate, or LGBTQIA plus. I can't remember what the I and the A stand for. But if you put the plus, I think it indicates the intent and offers the possibility for further inclusion further down the line.
Thank you.
Point.
It's a gender and a sexual orientation group. It's not just one or the other. They've taken in, it's because you could, I don't know how to find anything that's not initials for that group. I can try. Let me give it some more thought, because maybe I say people of choosing genders and sexual identity.
Self-selected, preferential.
Right.
Because it's what, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think the plus is a big. I
like that.
Yeah, but if you want the definition ahead of it, that's what I don't know. I'll try. I'll give it a shot. I'll try to.
Thank you.
Well, we're giving you some direction at least, so that's good. That's good. Any other comments before we move on to the ordinance? Michelle, I think you've done a really good job. You've done I know you've taken a great deal of time and you've reached out for advice, you've reached out for assistance, and I'm telling you, I am thoroughly impressed with the work you've done here. This is really wonderful.
Thank you. Kaz did help me.
Yeah, he's done yeoman's work as well, but it's this is so superior to the what I had been thinking when this topic came to my attention, and it's great. Okay, so councilors.
I'm just really impressed that we took this to heart and we've all come to a consensus and we've all pushed, and then we have our great manager that just takes our direction and goes with it, and I'm so happy that I always think those government wheels turn very slowly sometimes and things just don't happen as fast as I would like them to, but we were on top of this, and I think all of us had a hand in that, and especially Michelle and Richard. So thank you guys.
Well, I know the intent of this document, the resolution especially, is intended to be a living document. So it can change and it can get altered by future generations of our council based on situations that come to play. So this is what we have to start with, and it's wonderful. Okay, so moving on to the ordinance. How do we feel about this, council? I'll open it up to comments and questions.
May I jump in here?
Yes, you may, Michelle. Feel free.
Something was pointed out to me that was not even a consideration when I was drafting this ordinance, and that is the question of whether or not a person has to be a citizen of the United States to actually sit on this commission. You have folks who are residents here, who are legal immigrants, who would bring a strong perspective, I think, to the table, but I think it's something that as a city council, I certainly didn't think about it. I thought it was a great question when it was posed to me, and I think I would like to have you discuss what your thoughts are on it.
Yeah, that's a very interesting concept and question, and I'm going to have to mull on that one a little bit. I did see Martha raise her hand, so feel free, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I would say that was not an obstacle. That if the person is present geographically and wants to pitch in an opinion, they're welcome to. I would rather not have reasons to exclude people, and that's a pretty high bar. Thanks. That's it.
Okay, Councillor Knudsen.
So I guess my original question was the thing about them having to be part of city limits, because I know some of our board members on other, like on the parks, we have somebody that's not necessarily part of Crestwell or Crestwell city limits, but they do bring a voice, they do bring a perspective that is needed. And you know, Crestwell city limits is pretty small compared to all the people that live outside of Crestwell city limits that still put their kids in our schools, still come and patron our restaurants and our local businesses. So I hate excluding them, because I feel like I know a lot of people that live just outside city limits, or, you know, just outside Camas or wherever, Cloverdale, and they're excluded from having a voice, even though, I mean, I understand why we do it in, you know, the water board, I guess, but we don't do it for the parks. Am I incorrect in that? We have somebody that's outside of city limits that serves on the parks board. And I guess I would like to have that here too. I don't want to be excluding people.
Do you want to set a specific number?
Yeah, well, I mean, what do we have with the parks? Is it 1 or 2? One.
And actually on the water board, one of the people is a business person that may reside outside of the city limits.
Okay.
And I think on the airport commission, I'm not sure all of the airport commissioners reside inside city limits either. It typically would fall to, you know, what kind of power they have regarding expenditures for the budget or making policy. But since this commission will not have any powers in and of itself, it will have to come back to the council. I think your point is really a good one.
Yeah.
Well, I think we should make some room for those people that don't live within city limits. And room for people that aren't necessarily U.S. citizens as well.
So do you want no requirement to live in the city? Do you want one person outside of the city? Do you have a preference?
Well, I'll open that up to council as far as that goes. So Amy seems to feel 1. Is that correct, Amy?
At least 1. But of course, you know, we always get punched with that. Nobody wants to volunteer for our boards. And so it's like we're trying to fill positions. And if we say we need 5 that live outside city limits and we don't have 5 applicants, then our board goes, you know, unmanned. So.
Well, I think I would say a maximum of 2 is kind of what I was thinking. And I agree with Martha's concept about, you know, not necessarily being a citizen as well. So, Kevin, I saw your hand up, sir.
Yes, definitely. I am on board with if you're at least 1. I think that we want to make sure that the board doesn't get too big. 2 would probably be the max. And I think that citizen is probably the definition that we want to use for those that are not at large. So anybody that's a citizen of Crestwell, so that would include anybody that was not a naturalized citizen. The other thing that I was going to suggest, I think this was already kind of alluded to, is that it's some kind of a cross-pollination between our different committees would be kind of nice. I know that a lot of stuff will filter up to the council, but I see a lot of direct relations between an equity committee and, say, public safety and equity and finance and administration and public or transportation even would be one of those. So any way that we can allow that cross-pollination to happen without necessarily having to filter filter up to the council first, or at least informing of each other of our work, I think would be great.
You would have to change the composition of those committees. Those are only city councilors. The
And she's-
transportation committee is only city councilors.
Mhm.
The finance committee is only city councilors, and the
Public
public
safety.
safety is only city councilors.
But the Equity Commission can inform the Public Safety Committee, right? I mean, that would be like something that they would be able to say and filter up. Does that not work that way?
Well, they could attend the meetings and interact with the counselors at the meetings, but they would not have a formal role in those meetings.
Right. I wasn't thinking of formal, just more of a communication type of role.
Yeah, I think anything of that kind of communication would actually have to come back to council, through the mayor, that type of stuff.
So an example, I guess, would be that say we're making some considerations in the Public Safety Committee about the next resource that we would be adding. Maybe we're thinking that maybe instead of doing another officer, maybe we're going to do some other kind of a resource, like a mental health resource. That's just an example. I'm just throwing it out there. And so we come across a situation where, boy, it sure would be nice for us to have some insight from the Equity Committee. That's all I'm talking about, is just somehow before we even make those recommendations that go up to council and then get voted on, we kind of need that input. And so I don't know how that would happen.
Yeah, structurally, the committees are separate because of, I think, in order to accommodate some of the quorum issues, the actual structure, the language that creates them keeps them separate. I don't know how you could include them into more than one committee unless you went back and restructured the language, that creates committees in the first place.
And Michelle, isn't that kind of your role, that you kind of can help us with that kind of stuff if we need it also?
I could do my best, but I certainly would not be as an effective advocate as someone who was part of a minority.
Amy.
So I get what Kevin is saying, because it does seem like sometimes all of our committees kind of get out of whack and might benefit from knowing what other committees are working on and not being able to work on those at the same time. I get that, but I understand why it is the way it is, because we don't want to have serial meetings and we don't want to be colluding and counselors being on multiple committees and then making decisions and then coming to council and saying, hey, this is what we thought of. I get why we do it, but could a committee invite somebody from the Parks Board or the Equity Board that's not a counselor to come and speak to them about and discuss that? Could it be somebody that's not a counselor, that's on a board, that's invited to a meeting, it's on the agenda, we're going to discuss this with this committee? I mean, we've done that with the Planning Commission. We've had joint meetings with the Planning Commission and the council. There's an agenda, it's noticed. So if the Public Safety Committee wanted to discuss a certain aspect of public safety that happens to include, or they want to include, the Equity Board, invite somebody from the Equity Board that's not a counselor to come to a Public Safety Committee meeting.
They cannot come in their role as an Equity Board member, because the Equity Board can only meet in accordance with the charges that are given to it by the mayor. So any individual can't, it's just like the city council can't go to the state and, you as a member of the city council can't go and represent the city anywhere.
Right.
You have to do it as a council. And so that's kind of also someone on the Parks and Tree Board can't just say, hey, I know this committee's working on this, I want to go comment on it. They can as a private citizen, but they can't as a member of another committee, because they don't have that as their charge. They don't have the authorization. And these committees only work under the authorization of the mayor's charges.
Right. Okay. No, I mean, I get that.
I understand the practicality that you're trying to get to, but I'm just saying the structure of the way it's set up will not allow that kind of flexibility. And maybe what we need to do is, if you really want that kind of flexibility, we need to relook at how the committees are formatted. But when you do that, you lose a lot of the guidance of the committees, and they can get out of hand pretty fast and go on their own way. So there's a consequence. There's a reason for this.
Right. And I support that 100% because I feel like the way it's structured right now really protects us as counselors and board members, but also protects the public from, it's that transparency. We're not colluding. We're not going in the back room and making decisions and having meetings without the public knowledge. Everything's in an open meeting and everything comes, there's a chain of command, and I get it. So that's it.
Thank you for your input on that all, Michelle. I really appreciate that. Martha, I saw your hand up.
Thank you, sir. So why can't the maker the mayor make a charge that the committees report to each other? Build it in as a charge and say the committee comes up with a non-actionable report to take to another committee. Play within the rules.
That could happen.
Michelle's comment is that it's outside of the charge system. Create a charge.
That could work. You're going to make staff nuts. How many committees? Yeah.
Yeah.
And how
I got
committees
nothing
have
as far as
committees.
how that.
You don't have a lot of staff,
Yeah. I have nothing with how that charge would look or anything. I'm just throwing that little option out there.
I've been kind of rattling through this in my mind of how I would even word a charge that might accompany something that it might be a concern of the Public Safety or Transportation Committee. And I'm kind of, wow, I'm not even sure how I would even fashion something like that.
For the record, I really like our committee reports at the beginning of our meetings. I think those actually, for me, that serves in that moment of finding out what the other committees are doing. Folks do a really good job of them. And then we have access to the minutes, I'm sure, after the fact, if we're really that curious, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Michelle, go ahead.
I was going to say your example of the Planning Commission is an interesting one, though, because the Planning Commission does have authority outside of the City Council. So that is the one committee that is got some latitude and actually operates independently of what you do. All the other commissions and boards, though, should be reporting to the City Council on what they're up to.
Yeah, I
but
would agree
council
with that.
doesn't serve on that either.
No, you have
So
to be separate. Yeah, that's deliberately.
They have to report to us, otherwise we wouldn't know what's going on because there's no counselor on there to report back. So.
Any further comments or questions about the ordinance? There was one question I had, Michelle, under section 8 officers, line 42 and 3. Would there also not be, because it says something in there that you need to keep records. Does an election of a secretary for that committee need to be necessary then?
Yeah.
Sadly.
Sorry. It just
Nobody
defined.
ever wants to be the secretary, though.
I understand, and I know unfortunately that does fall on you because you attend so many of these, if not all of these meetings, and your notes and so forth have been very fruitful and very beneficial for a lot of the committee chairs, and in my past that has certainly been the case. But anyway, I just think it's something that, with something that important, I believe that, all of our committees, it's just really, really important to have somebody that takes care of the minutes and does so and presents them in a fashion that they can be filed with the, the committee chair as well as with the, our records clerk. So, Kevin, did you have your hand up, sir? Okay.
Mayor, your microphone's off.
You're right. It is. Thank you very much, Amy. So council, we've discussed the resolution. We've also discussed the ordinance, and we've made suggested edits and so forth. Are we comfortable with Michelle making the suggested edits and bringing this back to council, or do we want to talk about this at another work session? I'll leave it up to you guys. Amy, go ahead.
I'm okay with the edits if Michelle is comfortable with that timeline, bringing it to the September meeting. But if you guys want to discuss it more.
Okay. We have one consensus vote for moving forward with this suggested edits. Any other consensus on this one? I can't see your hand there, Kevin. Try your left hand instead.
And I'll do the other hand, the virtual hand. So I'm completely fine moving this forward. I was just going to throw out the question of whether there's any way that we could engage the public a little bit more with it, but you know, because it does feel like a big thing, and it's just the 6 of us right now, or 7. And it feels like maybe we're missing that component.
I agree. That's my niggling little voice in the background says that too.
Yeah, that was one suggestion that Kaz had in regards to holding the, virtual town halls and so forth. And, I believe the intent was to hold those following, the resolution and the ordinance and so forth. But, the ordinance, these are easily changeable in the future. So, and I believe that, Kaz might want to weigh in on what his thoughts were, and Michelle as well, what your thoughts are in that regard as to benefits of doing one or the other first, or together, or hold off on, or, I'll open that up to your comments. So I'll open it to Michelle first.
Really, I have no druthers on it one way or the other. We can certainly have a virtual town hall. The timing of it might be a little bit difficult for me because I will not be available on September 14th. But we can work around that, and I can certainly be part of a virtual town hall in the few weeks later.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think it might be. I don't have a feel for whether or not the community is ready to discuss this and at what level they're ready to undertake it.
Kaz, would you like to weigh in on this, sir?
Yep, I would hope to see the resolution go forward. I think there are clearly some other issues to work out with the ordinance with regards to the commission, and some thinking about how it would report to the other bodies. But I would hope that that what's contained within the ordinance is an expression of the values of this community. I would hope that there's nothing in there that is contentious, and that council would feel empowered to move forward with it on the basis of your knowledge of the community that you serve. But that said, I do believe that there is some thinking to be done about the precise relationship between the equity board or commission and the other boards and commissions in the city. So perhaps if I were able to make a recommendation, it would be to move forward with the resolution as a statement of intent, and a statement of where your hearts are. And then we can work on the detail to make sure that the Equity Commission is as effective as possible going forward.
All right, sir. Thank you very much. And that really is kind of where my heart lies on far as this goes. And that was the first intent of mine was, get something on the documents that shows our intent, that shows, where Creswell City Council currently stands and how we feel about all of these issues that are included in the resolution. So, yeah, I think that is an excellent point. So, all right. So, Michelle, did you have anything to comment further on that before we ask for consensus on this?
I feel very comfortable with that recommendation.
Okay, very good. And I think that would give us time to, to spend potentially through the end of the year and when Michelle is back in operation again, later in September and early October, that we can move forward with, perhaps many town halls. Who knows? I mean, it could be several. But the fact that we have something on the docket and something on the statement of record for the city of Cresswell, that this is things that we will not stand for, and we do have in our hearts. So I would echo Kaz's sentiment that we move forward on the resolution first with Michelle's suggested edits, and then we talk about this further as far as the ordinance is concerned. So we have consensus on that, council? I see one thumb, two
Yes.
thumbs up, three thumbs up, four thumbs up, and I heard Judy say yes. All right, Michelle, so go ahead and make those suggested edits on the resolution and plan on bringing that forward to the September council meeting. I understand you will not be there, but I know you'll be there in spirit, and we will be there for you as well. And we will continue to work on the resolution, and I look forward so much to working with Kaz on the resolution and the ordinance, in the town halls that we're going to be having in the future, and the impact that it's going to have on Cresswell. So,
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor.
you,
If I may just invite councillors. I've met some of you already, but Michelle has my email address. So if any of the others want to get in touch and have any further discussions, I'd be very, very happy to meet you individually.
Very good, Kaz. I am so thankful that you made yourself available and that Kevin made us aware of you and the skills that you bring and the knowledge that you bring. It was wonderful.
Just to give real credit, actually, he's the one that approached us. So he found out about us. So that's all him.
Wow, that's even better yet. So in any case, council, that concludes our agenda for tonight. So I thank you so much for your dedication to Cresswell. Again, we have a 2.5-hour meeting under our belts or under our seats, so to speak. And I appreciate everybody for being so engaged and just great. So in any case, I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting adjourned. It is now 8:29. So good night, Cresswell, and good night.